The new album by Opeth is finally here, and I've been waiting for this for a very long time. I was definitely happy when I first heard the single and found out they were bringing back the death growls and going back to their classic sound. But I also found out something else which made me anticipate this album even more, and that's the fact that Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull was involved and appears on various tracks on this album. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how Opeth brought back their old sound and the importance of Ian Anderson in the transition to this new sound. This album marks a notable evolution in their musical style, incorporating several elements that distinguish it from their previous works. The most important one is the resurgence of death metal. This is the return of the death growls, which has been absent from their work since 2008's Watershed. This is the return to heavier musical territory, blending their progressive leanings with more aggressive elements. Even though they're bringing back the death metal, they still didn't lose their progressive rock influences. Tracks like Paragraph 1 exhibit a strong progressive rock sound, reminiscent of bands like Jethro Tull and even Pink Floyd. This influence is further strengthened by the collaboration with Ian Anderson, who is the frontman of Jethro Tull, and he contributes flute playing and spoken word parts. So I'll be talking about that later. There's also another change, and that's they are using shorter song lengths. Songs on the album tend to be about 5 to 7 minutes long, which is a departure from the longer, complex compositions that were found in their earlier albums. I thought that it made the album feel more focused. And another thing I noticed was there was a variety in vocal styles used, and they're using a wider range of vocal styles, including clean singing, death growls, and spoken word sections. And I felt this helped the storytelling aspect of the album, which created a more dynamic and engaging listening experience. Another thing was the incorporation of orchestral and acoustic elements. I thought that this added depth and texture to the music. I know it's something they've always done in the past, but they have a way of making it work and doing it very well. And finally, there's the other thing I noticed was the Middle Eastern influences. So for example, tracks like Paragraph 4 and Paragraph 5 incorporate Middle Eastern musical influences, and that adds this unique flavor to their progressive sound. And another thing is this is a full-fledged concept album, a format they haven't really used since 1999 Still Life. And I'm going to tell the story of what's going on in this album, but I'm going to have spoilers, so I'm going to save it to the end. And if you want, you could just duck out the video when I tell the story. But if you want to stay for the whole thing, I'll give you more thoughts on this, and I'll give it a score out of 10. But let me continue. So basically, I think they went into this album, they wanted to do two things. They wanted to bring back the classic sound from the earlier albums, but at the same time, they didn't want to abandon that newer period that was more focused on the progressive rock. So, for example, Paragraph 1 has this very progressive rock sound, but still retains elements of their heavier style. Paragraph 6 has a complex progressive rock sound and incorporates elements of Pink Floyd and even Deep Purple. And the progressive rock direction aligns with the involvement of Ian Anderson, whose band Jethro Tull is really a forerunner in that genre. Now, Ian Anderson plays the flute on Paragraph 4, and that kind of creates this Jethro Tull meets Opeth sound. And that's probably one of my favorite tracks just because of that, because those are like two of my favorite bands of all time. And I like the fact that they're bringing this Jethro Tull sound, but still playing death metal. So I think that's really cool. There are also good tracks I liked called Paragraph 1 and Paragraph 4, because they have the clean vocals and death growls, and I thought this showed how they blend their progressive and heavier tendencies. Then another unique aspect of the album's sound is that they use the Middle Eastern influences, and that can be heard in Paragraph 4 and Paragraph 5. And those influences add a distinct flavor to the overall progressive sound. But we all know Opeth has a tendency to include some softer songs on their album. So this album utilizes orchestral sections and acoustic instrumentation throughout the album. And you can hear things. There are some soft orchestral sections. There are some creepy keyboards, haunting keyboards. And one song, Paragraph 4, has this soft section with a piano, or I think it might be a harp. But it goes into this progressive rock section, which features Ian Anderson playing the flute. I also found that it was interesting that the album featured a few psychedelic touches, mostly in Paragraph 2. So I like they're going beyond their traditional progressive metal framework. And also noticed that there were moments that reminded me of some of their older albums. So for example, Paragraph 3 sounded like some of the material from previous releases, such as In Cauda Venenum, and the closing track, A Story Never Told, could be compared to the softer, more melancholic style of Damnation, as well as Lovelorn Crime from In Cauda Venenum. So they're still trying to bring back some of the sounds from their previous albums. Now, finally, I want to talk about the contributions by Ian Anderson, who we all know is a legend. Mikael Åkerfeldt, he's been a big fan of Ian Anderson and Jethro Tull for a long time. He actually first attempted to contact him back in 2011. He wanted to have him play the flute on their album Heritage, but Mikael Åkerfeldt didn't get a response. And it wasn't until later when he spoke with Steven Wilson that Anderson, he received the request, but for some reason he didn't respond. I guess he wasn't really into it at that time. But now, years later, Mikael Åkerfeldt wants to work with Ian Anderson again, so he agreed. Now, while working on this album, Last Will and Testament, Mikael Åkerfeldt felt that Ian Anderson's distinct voice was the perfect fit for this album's narration, because it was about family secrets and it involved reading a will. So I think the use of Ian Anderson, he's kind of like the progressive rock version of Vincent Price, I think, something like that. He has the perfect voice for this. I'm glad that Ian Anderson is on this album because I really like the flute parts and the spoken word segments. And it's pretty cool because Mikael Åkerfeldt has been wanting to do this for a long time. So it kind of like creates a milestone in Opeth's career. It's also cool because this is about reading a will, and it kind of reminds me of this old Twilight Zone episode. I'm going to be showing some images of that where they're all wearing masks, and I think this particular album would go really great with that particular Twilight Zone album. So I'm just mentioning that because Twilight Zone is like one of my favorite TV shows of all time. But back to the story, Ian Anderson plays a flute on paragraph 4, and he also plays a little bit on the last song, A Story Never Told, which is the only song which is not like part of the paragraph or part of the will, I guess. So I think it's really cool, and I think Ian Anderson's involvement really aligns with the album's overall exploration of progressive rock because he is a legend. So this is definitely a great album. I'm giving this album a 9 out of 10. I think it just definitely holds up. I'm going to be ranking Opeth pretty soon. But before I go, if you don't want to hear this, you can leave now. But if you want, you can stay. I'm going to tell you about the story. So just a quick spoiler alert. I'm going to be telling you what the story is about and all that. So basically, this album tells the story of a wealthy conservative patriarch in the post-World War I era and the shocking family secrets revealed after his death. This album unfolds through his last will and testament, read aloud in his mansion with key figures present who are the patriarch, a wealthy conservative man who's revealed to be infertile, the twins, two brothers who were raised believing they were the patriarch's sons, but discovered they are not biologically related to him, and a young girl, an orphan with polio, who was raised by the family. She has a big secret. She is actually the patriarch's biological daughter, born from his relationship with his maid. So the album begins with a reading of the patriarch's will, an event that sets the stage for the unveiling of these family secrets. The reading of the will reveals that the twins are not the patriarch's biological sons. As a consequence, they're excluded from inheriting the wealth of the will. So this revelation sparks suspicion and questions, especially regarding the young girl's presence at the reading. The will ultimately reveals that the young girl, despite her status as an orphan and her physical challenges, is the patriarch's sole biological child and therefore his rightful heir. So the album's structure mirrors the reading of the will. Most of the song titles, as I was saying, are paragraph 1, paragraph 2, and so on, which represent different sections of the will. And Ian Anderson, he does the narrative throughout all the spoken word passages, and he reads a part of the will in paragraph 7. So definitely, it's a great album. I recommend it. It's their best album in a long time. You can look forward to my ranking when it should come out in about a week or so. But in the meantime, check out my review of Still Life. I'm going to stick that one right there. That was their previous concept album. And thanks for watching. Please give the video a like. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm. Please subscribe if you have not already. I do rock and metal reviews, rankings, and more. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.